Welcome to Sharpe Insights, conversations with your plan giving experts, a podcast for development professionals. Whether you're new to the field or looking to enhance your existing program, we will provide practical tips, expert advice, and real-world stories to deepen your understanding of plan giving. If you're committed to securing long-term support for your nonprofit, you've come to the right place.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Grant Miller. We're excited to be joined today by John Jensen, Director of Plan Giving for Washington National Cathedral. John brings a wealth of knowledge and decades of experience in the field of plan giving. John, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us today.
Happy to be here, Grant.
Also sitting in today is Kristen Kroon, a Sharpe Group senior consultant who works with John to develop the Cathedral's printed plan giving marketing materials. Kristen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Grant. I'm delighted to be here and happy to be highlighting John's work in the field.
Today we're going to talk about valuable lessons that John's learned, changes he's witnessed in the field over the years, which types of gifts are popular in the current economic environment, and tips to connect with older audiences. Well, let's get into it. John, let's start at the beginning. What initially attracted you to plan giving work?
You know, Grant, I always enjoyed working with seniors, even as a kid, in part because I'd hear fascinating stories. And that was always just so interesting. There was one guy I met and worked with years ago who was in the service during World War II. He went over on a troop carrier. Unfortunately, that ship got sunk by a torpedo. And he managed to get in a lifeboat. And he was never so happy as to when that lifeboat picked him up and put him on another Navy ship until that got torpedoed. Said he never wanted to see another ship again.
I could imagine.
But you hear great stories. Beyond that, it's really important to me to try to make a long-term institutional difference with charities that I work with that will way outlast me. Boy, did I do that at the Nature Conservancy. I was the development VP there, and it was just so obvious to me that they needed to invest heavily in plan giving. And I managed to get them to do just that. They increased the budget for plan giving from $150,000 to $750,000 in 1 year, and the staffing from 3 to, I think it was 14 members. 7 years later, that had grown from $3 million a year in spendable cash to $30 million. And, you know, it went up, I think, after 10 years, it gotten up to $75 million, and now at $200 to $300 million a year. Boy, that was a really important thing to do. And some of the lessons I learned from that is staffing and marketing really matters a lot. Consistency of messaging and staff are critical because you can cripple a program when the staff level drops suddenly, like when there's a budget shortfall. You absolutely have got to sell the idea of plan giving to management and to the other staff members. You want to be as transparent as possible, and you want to set reasonable time frames. I've seen some charities that are upset because a year or two after they start the program, they're not seeing a lot of money coming in. You got to make sure they understand it takes at least 5 years from the start of actually marketing to the time that you actually see the cash. The other thing I learned, if you're a multi-level charity, a national charity with local chapters, you absolutely have got to sell and explain to the chapters and the local chapter staff and boards, whatever they might have, the value of plan giving, and find a way to split the revenue, split the pot. Because if it benefits them, they're going to help you do it. Then I was the development VP at the National Wildlife Federation. I did something similar. Again, I convinced management to really invest substantially and quickly in plan giving, and we did extremely well with that. And that doubled within a matter of 5 or 6 years. Now, the other thing that I've really enjoyed here at the Washington National Cathedral, I've been here for 4 years, and we instituted a legacy challenge about 2 years ago. Been incredibly successful. It's generated a lot of new estate gift decisions. It's a great way to convince donors to share estimated gift amounts because that's something we don't usually know. And that's something that finance and boards and those sorts of people always want to have some sort of figure to hang the hat on. And if you don't have that, you lose a lot of credibility. If you do have it, boy, is it powerful. And it's a great a great excuse to talk to your Legacy Society members. Overall lessons I guess I've learned is plan giving revenue is inherently variable from year to year, sometimes really dramatically so. The best use for plan giving and the best kind of solicitations for plan giving is generally for endowment, some sort of long-term revenue-generating investment efforts, or perhaps one-time capital projects, because plan giving is inherently a series of one-time capital gifts. Really tough to get that second bequest from the same donor. Another lesson I've learned is don't use these one-time gifts to fund your operating expenses. If you do that, you're getting yourself into a very dangerous situation institutionally. I've seen a number of groups do this when I was doing consulting work, and if they had a bad year or two, it could devastate the organization. And I've seen a couple of CEOs who basically lost their jobs because of this. That I've seen them with substantial staff layoffs and serious and unexpected problems. And basically, it's because you're counting on capital gifts that are sporadic to pay for your operating expenses. Really bad issue. Now, Grant, you also asked how the field has evolved or changed over the years. I would say it's ebbed and flowed quite a bit. The biggest difference, the biggest change, I think, has been access to technical information. When I first started back in the early 70s, plan giving staff knew a lot about these things. Financial planners didn't. But you didn't really have the internet then. You have it now. Because it didn't exist then, we had enormous amounts of information nobody else had. That's not true anymore.
Thanks, John. I wanted to jump back to a point that you mentioned earlier. I find this with a lot of my clients that they will oftentimes have their budget reduced and will have a hard time explaining to the management or the board or the higher ups who are given the green lights and things. You mentioned the idea of selling the idea to the management or the board. Do you have any tips for ways to convince people within the organization who might be skeptical of the plan giving program and how to get that moving forward?
The biggest problem I find with selling management is that with many charities, they don't have any facts about plan giving. They don't have the facts nationally, and they don't have facts specific to their organization. And with any manager that doesn't understand a given program, which is very much true of plan giving in most charities, managers do what they typically do for other things. They make assumptions based on their experience. The problem is so much of plan giving is counterintuitive. And so what you need to do is gather some facts. Who's making these gifts? When did the final will get signed? Usually it's 4 or 5 years prior. How much money are you getting from single older women without children? That's really the biggest chunk of people who will make plan gifts in my experience. What is the average gift from a specific dollar bequest, say 10,000, compared to residuary gifts? Well, we know from the data we've collected that residuary gifts are anywhere from 5 to 30 times larger than the specific dollar bequests. And most specific dollar bequests, they seem to average between $11,000 and $12,000, whereas residuary are way bigger than that. So when you gather these facts and you present them on a consistent basis, and not just at budget time, you do it throughout the year, that really enhances your credibility with management, and they begin to understand this stuff. And you need to kind of feed it to them piecemeal.
Thanks, John. That's great advice. So I'm just curious, during your time working in plan giving throughout the years, what types of gifts have declined in popularity and what types of gifts have increased? And why do you think that is?
Well, I'd say the type of plan gifts that are essentially dropped off the screen, the radar screen, are pooled income fund gifts. When I started in the 1970s, they were very popular. And they lasted for 5 or 10 years, and then they just kind of went away, and almost nobody does them anymore. In fact, a lot of plan giving staff hardly understand what they are. Now, in terms of what's done well and what's new, basically a retirement plan, beneficiary forms. Again, when I first started, IRAs were just starting to exist, and you still had a lot of pensions. That's not true anymore. So with IRAs and 401ks and 403bs and that sort of thing, that's becoming an increasingly large source of revenue for us. I'd say those are kind of the two bookends, if you will.
Yes, we definitely keep very consistent messaging about IRAs.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on donor advised funds? They seem to be an increasingly popular way to give.
It certainly is something that's out there, and some groups do very well with it. It is something you want to encourage for general operating kind of revenues. but I have not seen much of anything in the way of estate-related gifts coming from donor-advised funds. I'm sure there's some out there, and I know that a lot of our donors have them, but I just haven't seen that come in. I think they tend to go in different directions rather than to the cathedral, or perhaps they are passed on to children to kind of teach them about philanthropy, and they make those gift decisions.
Thanks, John. Let's pivot a little bit. You mentioned earlier that you really like working with donors and hearing their stories, and that's something that I can really relate to. One of my favorite parts of my job is meeting donors, listening to their stories, and writing their stories for the content that we put out. I'm just curious, what is the best way to steward these donors, particularly donors over 80? Do you have any advice for us?
Oh, sure. The first thing is just that personal contact. Go and meet and visit them. Oftentimes, what you find is they can be sometimes lonely, but they're also at a stage of life where they don't get out as much and they enjoy hearing other things that are going on. And I enjoy meeting and visiting with them and hearing stories about what they've gone through. I also know that when you go to visit somebody like that, you're just not going to get out of their home in less than 2 hours. So count on that. Talk with them, visit if possible. Your best prospects are usually those that are single and or those who have no kids. And if they don't have the children and other family members that are close, they tend to have a smaller circle. Well, I think that happens anyway as you get to that stage of life. And when you go to visit them, don't feel that you've got to focus just on your institution. Get to know them. These visits are about relationship building. And I always say that in a 2-hour visit, I'm going to spend maybe 5 minutes talking about some aspect of giving or plan giving, maybe 10 minutes talking about the institution, and I'm going to spend an hour and a half talking about the dog that barked next door, or the difficulties of getting a certain kind of plant working up, or any number of other things. Talk to them the way you talk with a friend or a grandparent. And I just find that to be a lot of fun.
I agree. Most of the donors that I speak with, I speak over the phone, and I have had conversations that lasted 20 minutes, and I have had conversations that lasted 3 hours. And occasionally I have donors that will even still send me a postcard every once in a while, and that's always nice to get.
Yep.
Speaking of these donors, there are so many different ways now with the technology and everything to communicate with people between social media, email. What, in your mind, is the best way to communicate with these donors? What methods of communication, what types of materials do you find most effective? Print, email, social media, a combination of all of the above. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my response is yes. You want to use them all. What's important is repetition and frequency of messaging. It used to be primarily print. That's not the case anymore. Print, especially in combination with digital marketing, the combination of COVID and boomers aging into the kind of estate planning phase of life has made it increasingly important that you use multiple different approaches. You want to focus on materials that talk about estate planning education. And by the way, as you're updating your plans, please consider including us in those plans. Make your pitches as soft sell, understated. Don't beat them over the head. Don't say, gee, Grant, you're looking a little green around the gills today. Let's talk about your estate plan. That doesn't really work very well. Got to be a little more soft sell than that.
That makes sense. What would you say to a young development officer just starting out their career who is skeptical of print because they've been doing everything on their phone or on the computer or the email? What would you say to that about the importance of continuing to use print publication?
I would say somebody at that age is 40 or 50 years away from doing serious estate planning. And they are not used to the same kinds of experiences and things that some of their seniors are going to be. When it comes to print materials, first of all, print is way more important for older folks than it is for younger folks. That's pretty clear because we grew up with print, and digital is something that's come along much later in our lives and our experiences. So some of my rules for print marketing to older audiences that I think is really important: use large type for print, but also for digital. I like to use at least 14-point type for anybody over 70. Use high contrast colors. Younger folks with perfect eyesight can see that stuff very well. Older folks don't see it so much. Use clean, easy to read typefaces. Something like Times New Roman is perhaps my favorite. indent every paragraph. Why? Because it makes it easier to read. No paragraph should be over 7 lines. I don't mean sentences, I mean lines. It becomes much easier for people to read, especially for seniors. If it's longer than that, people tend to jump over it. They'll read a line or two, then they go to the next paragraph and you miss them. And lastly, and most importantly, tell a story. People love to hear stories, so share stories with them. Show the impact a gift will give. Show and tell them about other people that have made gifts of this sort, and make them interesting. But don't focus on just on fundraising. Share stories about your institution.
Great. Thanks, John. And continuing this conversation about donors and potential donors, do you have any advice for maintaining long-term relationships with these donors? So much of the work we do is keeping the long-term strategy in mind. So what are some strategies you have for maintaining these long-term relationships?
Phone calls are great, and don't make them short. If you give people a minute or two, they will start talking, and you learn so much more by listening than by talking. And don't try to push them off the phone quickly. Visits. When somebody tells you they put you in their estate plan, if it's possible, try to go visit them at least once or twice, because once you've established a personal relationship with a visit, that relationship is much easier to maintain by notes and phone calls and that sort of thing. To get them talking, ask them about how it used to be. At the cathedral, for example, a lot of my plan giving prospects, especially here in the Washington area, remember when the cathedral was still under construction and how they used to have to go around construction materials to get into the nave when they wanted to go to church on Sundays. Find ways to get them talking. Share insider information. So, for example, I used to run the Nature Conservancy's main chapter. I was their executive director. And what I'd do is I'd prepare press releases every time we had a land acquisition project. And I got a 1/2-inch tall advance copy stamp. And I stamped it and mailed it out with bright red or bright blue lettering announcing that we had acquired this property. But I would send a copy of this press release, stamped advance copy, to arrive in the donors' homes a few days before the release date of the press release. That made them feel like an insider. Didn't matter if they ever saw it in the newspaper. We shared this with them before other people knew about it, and that was really valuable.
Thanks. And through using these strategies over the years, what is the most unique or memorable gift that you've ever helped secure? And what made it stand out to you?
Oh, I had this delightful woman out in California, and she was single. She had sent a note asking if we did these charitable gift annuities. Well, I ended up going out to see her. I was going to be in California anyway. And the long and the short of it was she ended up giving us 2 houses on a lot as part of a charitable remainder annuity trust. Now, that allowed her to increase her income substantially, and that then allowed her to go travel. So I started getting postcards from her, from England, from France, from China, from the Middle East. But my favorite one was a photo of her sitting on a camel in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza. At this point, this lady was like 80 years old. And we ended up doing 2 or 3 different articles about her and some of her trips and the like. It made for a really interesting and fun human interest story. And it also made the point of how she financed that and how this gift gave her more income to allow her to both help the charity as well as have a good time herself.
Great. The best way to be successful in any of our work or endeavors that we do is learning from other people. I'm just curious, who's mentored or inspired you most in your work, and what were some of the lessons that you took from them?
I really had 2 mentors. One was Dick Anderson. He was the executive director of the Maine Audubon Society back when I was a teenager. I was in high school and college. He hired me as their development director, and I had a great time. But he was relentlessly supportive of me and gave me room to grow while offering helpful advice and guiding me in a really helpful way. And he was relentlessly good at finding ways to tell an organization's story in interesting and humorous ways. He was just a real operator when it came to that sort of thing. And to this day, he's a close friend, and I see him every time I go back up to Maine. We typically go out to dinner or lunch. He's 20 years older than I am, and he's just a great guy. The other guy that was a real mentor to me is Robert Sharpe Jr. I worked for him for close to 15 years. He demonstrated the value and power of digging in and pulling out facts about your own donors and especially about your planned giving donors. He talked about the how, the what, the when of planned and estate gifts, and that helped me to understand it, also helped me to teach other people about it. He was a guy of great integrity who always stressed looking out first for the donor, and I think that's 100% right. He passed away a few years ago. I miss him dearly. He was a great loss to the charitable community, and especially to me.
Yes, I've heard so much about him. Kristen, if I may, we haven't heard from you. Just curious about who's mentored and inspired you most in your work,
Well,
and
that's
what
the
lessons have
layup,
you taken?
Grant, because we're talking to him right now. Since I've been working at Sharpe Group, I had the good fortune to work with John as a coworker and then with John as a client. And that's been a really interesting perspective to see the same individual in two different roles. And I try my best to take John's advice and when I'm in John's presence and listen more than I talk. Recently, I had the opportunity to meet with John and his planned giving staff in person. And as John was talking about the importance of in-person visits, it struck me because the in-person meeting for our year-long planned giving campaign planning was so much more robust, and we covered so much more detail than we would have covered perhaps on a Zoom call. So while travel is difficult, I would stress, as John did, the importance of in-person meetings. But it's really been wonderful to work with John. And then additionally, my other consultants, both Julie Schuldner and Joe Chicky, we have a very collaborative relationship, and it is wonderful to be able to pick up the phone and call and get their perspective on things because we all come from different backgrounds. So that is one of the wonderful things about this field of planned giving is people share and they all seek to lift up everyone else.
I agree. I've learned so much in these last 5 years from our consultants and clients, and I came to the planned giving world pretty cold. I didn't know much about it. I was hired mostly for my creative work, and I've learned so much over the years collaborating with you, Kristen, and Joe and Julie. I'm just curious, and I also would like to hear from both of you on this question. What advice would you give someone who's just starting out a career in planned giving?
John, I'll start with that. In the field, there are so many organizations such as AFP or charitable gift planners, and it's easy to dismiss those groups. They are a powerful resource. There's a lot of information out there for you at your hands. CGP has a listserv where people put in questions, and I know when I started out, that was the first thing I did every morning was I would go onto the listserv and see what the questions were out there and read the answers. And every day I learned something new, and I began to sort of build a network of people who I learned were very reliable and helpful. So definitely the affinity groups I would suggest. And then also find a mentor. That is true for anybody starting out in a field. If you can find somebody who's been in the field for a while and who is willing to take you with them, you just sort of learn their cadence, the way they approach things, and those soft skills are more valuable than learning the technical interest rate this month.
Thanks, Kristen. John, what would you like to add to that?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Let me offer some other thoughts as well to build on that. One, focus on relationship building and marketing. Learn enough about the technical aspects or estate planning topics to recognize a given situation, but don't feel you've got to be a technician. I'm a CFP. I've had a lot of technical knowledge and background. What I've told my clients and just friends at other charities is don't go out and hire a financial planner, a trust officer, or an attorney to be a planned giving director or officer unless they're really good with people. And those kind of folks often are not good with ordinary people. Don't hire them because they have that skill. Hire them because they're good at relationships. And if they happen to have the skill, that's great. Listen more than talk. You always learn more, and donors appreciate you more when they're talking. Pay special attention to childless individuals, especially over 70. That's when people start seriously thinking about estate planning. Before that, it's not generally serious. And never, ever, ever assume someone is too old to make a gift decision. I mean, the most common point when the final and operative estate gift decision is made is in the calendar year prior to death, followed by the year of death. It's never too late. In fact, the average time before the final and operative will or trust is signed that includes a charitable bequest is 5 years prior to the time somebody reaches their time of passing. Obviously, you look at that after the fact, but that's what we've consistently found. I've done a lot of plan giving assessments and audits and examinations. I found that to be true everywhere.
Excellent. I have a bonus question for you, John. I understand that you were in public office early in your career. Why did you go into public office? What was that experience like for you? And how did it influence your work in plan giving, if at all?
I had always been interested in social improvement, social betterment, trying to make a difference from the time I was a kid. My parents were like that as well. I served in a couple of governmental boards when I was a teenager, including one a model cities board that we controlled about $15 million a year in government funding. Now, that's equivalent to about $75 million a year. We saw a lot of organizations. And then I ended up running for and getting elected to the Maine state legislature. In fact, I ran against my political science professor the year he was teaching Maine state government, and I beat him. I still got a B. I thought that was pretty good. And I was the baby of the house. It was a fascinating experience, and it allowed me to try to make a difference. What I also found is that everything seemed so clear the day before I got elected, and so much more complicated starting the next day when I actually began to dig in and see what the facts are and what the problems were. And the society, we've got a very complicated society in this country. We need a lot of different kinds of perspectives, a lot of different ways to address, identify, and solve problems. And the charitable sector, that's what we're all about. And if we can make a difference, that's what I've always tried to do. That's what I've always wanted to do. I should point out one other thing, and that is the way I ultimately got my first fundraising job as the development director of the Maine Audubon Society was when I was working for Shaw's Supermarket in Portland, Maine, and I got fired for my long hair. But we don't have to talk about how long ago that was.
I guess it was back before long hair was socially acceptable. Is that right?
I'd say that's fair.
Well, thanks so much, John. Again, we're sitting here today with John Jensen, the Director of Plan Giving for Washington National Cathedral. That's our time today. John, we're so grateful for you for joining us today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Happy to help.
And Kristen, thanks for sitting in as well. And
thank you, Grant, and grateful to highlight John's work.
Thanks so much. You've both given our audience some great advice and lots to think about today. Thanks for listening. We hope today's discussion gave you practical takeaways to grow your plan giving program. To submit questions and topics for future episodes, go to sharpegroup.org or listen to us on your favorite podcast app. If you found this podcast insightful, be sure to like, review, and subscribe. Until then, stay sharp.